Of climate challenges. Alastair McLeod is the chair of the MacDoc Foundation. Welcome to you. Great to have you at Beef TV.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for having me.
It is warm outside, isn't it?
It's getting a bit warm, yeah.
But you
Good Queensland weather.
You've got to enjoy the sunshine because the cattle are magnificent.
The cattle are great. Yeah.
You attended COP28 in Dubai.
Yep.
Something pretty profound happened there.
Yeah. It was the first COP to really talk about food and ag. I'd been to a couple of other COPs before that, and the food and ag conversation was very much on the outer. This COP was, the COP presidency made a point of going, let's talk about food and ag and the part that food and ag has to play in dealing with climate change and dealing with emissions and all the rest of it. And I think the conversation has started, and I think that conversation is going to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger.
It's a mega trend really now, isn't it? And an unstoppable force that Australia, I think is addressing quite optimistically, as you are. Let's talk about what MacDoc Foundation does.
Yeah, so the MacDoc Foundation is just part of what we do. We have a MacDoc Ag Group, which is our business side, which we run. You might have heard of Wilmot Cattle Company, which is one of our businesses. We have a carbon project developer called Atlas Carbon, and we have various other investments in that space. We have MacDoc Ventures, which is a venture capital business, and then MacDoc Foundation is our not-for-profit area where we get to fund all kinds of exciting things like our Farming for the Future project, which is talking about farming for the future.
As I said earlier in the introduction, you're optimistic about the opportunities.
Yep.
There's also a lot of fear in the market at the moment. The government's decarbonisation plan is another force to be reckoned with. How is that going to impact ag?
Well, I mean, I think that we can look at this as a challenge, or we can look at this as an opportunity. And one of the highlights of today so far for me was the presentation that was given as part of the Woolworths programme by this guy John Gilliland from Northern Ireland, who was talking about what he's done with farms in Northern Ireland and how they're unfolding a whole strategy to, first of all, understand the baseline of Northern Ireland farms mainly from an emissions point of view, but also from a carbon sequestration point of view, and also from a point of view of other aspects of natural capital. And they've got an incredibly positive program for how they can start, first of all, reducing emissions, increase sequestration, and generally make the industry there more ready for a decarbonised future. And I think that's what we've got to think about here.
Well, let's talk about livestock emissions, because it's an exciting opportunity, also a daunting challenge. What are you optimistic about in that space?
So one of the messages from COP, and I think this has been echoed at Beef Week as well, is that there's an enormous amount of money going into research for the reduction in livestock emissions. I think that, like every industry, there's a lot of money that's going to have to be deployed to look at new technologies for reducing emissions, and I think the livestock industry is no different. I've just recently been in the United States, where there's plenty of people from the Gates Foundation to the Bezos Earth Fund who are putting lots and lots of money into how we can reduce livestock emissions, and I'm confident, I don't think we're going to eliminate them, but I'm confident there's going to be a bunch of things that are going to come down the track that's going to make a difference.
You mentioned Wilmot Cattle Company under the MacDoc umbrella, and it made headlines as the first successful carbon sequestration deal struck with Microsoft. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So, I mean, I think since then there's been a lot more, well, actually not that many more, but there's been a few more soil carbon deals. And the important point about the Microsoft deal was, as you say, it was the first deal to demonstrate that carbon could be sequestered in the soil as well as carbon being sequestered in above ground vegetation. The significance of that is that we can keep on making land productive, particularly with grazing animals, while at the same time sequestering carbon. So prior to that point, carbon sequestration on farm involved locking land up, growing trees on it, taking them out of production. We believe very strongly in how you can keep land in production, but also sequester carbon. And that was the thinking behind this new business that we've launched called Atlas Carbon. They are an exhibitor at Beef Week this week, and pleased to say there's lots of interest from graziers looking at how they can run profitable grazing operations, but also think about sequestering carbon at the same time.
It's scary scenes when you look over at the EU with the pressure and regulation and public perception and policy shifts happening so quickly over there. Tractors blockading major cities in Europe. We're not responding the same way over here. We don't have the same pressures here just yet. What do you perceive for Australia over the next few years?
Well, I think it's very important that the government get their policy settings right here. And the policy settings in Europe have been much more about regulation rather than, shall we say, encouraging farmers to change the way they're doing things by putting the right policy levers in place. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, obviously, things like the carbon markets are going to be one aspect of that, but one of the key outputs of our Farming for the Future project is to demonstrate to as many farmers as possible that investing in their natural capital, building up climate resilience, building up nature, working with nature, is also good for their business. So we want to see a future whereby farmers are thinking about investing in natural capital because it's good for business rather than because government regulation has come along to say this is what's going to happen.
Alistair, could you sum up the message you want to get out on behalf of MacDoc Australia while you're here at Beef 2024?
I think that graziers should be embracing the future and thinking about the opportunities.
Great to have you here, Alistair McLeod, and wonderful work you're doing in the space of sustainability and moving the industry forward.
Thank you for having me.
Well, apparently by law in Australia, you need to wear a brand on your hat.